10 minutes past 8. You want to go ahead and get
Okay.
started? Sound good?
Sure.
Ready?
You
You
want me
ready
to
for
just
the?
go ahead and kick it off?
You ready for the fancy intro?
However you roll, man.
No, all I ever say is I say thanks for everybody for showing up tonight. Um, if you're okay with it, I'm recording this and I post it later
Yeah,
on, so that way if anybody that didn't show up can still watch it. Um,
sure.
David Jennings is also known as Rare Bird 101. Been around for a few years. I would call him the walking encyclopedia of wild turkey. We're lucky here in the Dayton area to have another uh, huge wild turkey encyclopedia out of Century Bar. Joe Head, he's a huge turkey fan. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you. If you want to do what you're normally doing, then we can open up the questions at the end.
Okay.
I'm sure you're going to get pummeled with a bunch of them, with probably involving bottles behind you and any information that you may have that may you be able to pass along to us
Cool.
in a while. But the floor is yours. Thanks, Dave.
Okay. Thank you. Um, yeah, I consider myself more of a super fan. Rather than expert. If you want an expert in turkey, you definitely go to Jimmy and Eddie for that. Um, but for everyone out there, my name's David Jennings. I wrote a book called American Spirit. It's right over here. It's the history of wild turkey. Plus, it gives you a walkthrough of the most of the expressions that are out right now. Well, at least that were out at the time I wrote the book 2 years ago. So you can find that on Amazon, or you can just go to wildturkeybook.com. But I started out as a blogger. I started the Rarebird 101 blog in 2016, and it kind of happened just out of chance. It wasn't like I decided I was going to do a wild turkey blog. If we rewind back to when I first got into whiskey seriously, because I enjoyed, like I'm 45 now, and when in the 90s, I would drink like, bourbon and Coke, like Jim and Coke, or I would do like Tennessee whiskey and Coke, like Jack and Coke, or even Crown and Coke. Um, and that was kind of like as far as I went with whiskey. Like Wild Turkey to me in the 90s was like the shooter that you did in college. And that was about all you would, and the rumor, it was like that's what you did, and you would wake up feeling it the next day. And most people would. But anyway, that was kind of like all I really knew about bourbon. Was using it as a mixer for many years. And in 2013, I think it was end of 2013, my brother-in-law, he had like a fancy Crown Royal bottle that he had gotten. I think it was one of the XRs or something like that. And he was like, "Hey, you want a little bit or whatever?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I thought that he would just like pour it in Coke or something. And he gave it to me just on the rocks. And I had never really, like, I'd had shots and stuff before, but I never really just had like whiskey as like a sipping kind of thing. And I thought it was quite nice, and just started doing a little bit of research online, trying to figure out, what is whiskey, what are the best whiskeys, the typical, noob searches. And just went to the liquor store and tried a few different Crown Royals, tried some Irish, tried some Scotch, eventually worked my way to bourbon. Um, and I avoided wild turkey because I remembered it being like the rough stuff when I was in college. So at some point, as I was getting into this bourbon journey, I started posting to our bourbon on Reddit, and I would post reviews of different bourbons and ryes that I was trying. And one day at checkout, I decided to pick up a bottle of 101, and I just assumed in my head that it would be like one of these reviews where I was gonna, just tear it to pieces because it was going to be a trash whiskey. I got home, tasted it, and realized that it was really good. Like I'm like, this is better than a lot of the other bourbons I've been writing about. And kind of ended up getting a few bottles here and there. And one day I was talking to someone on Reddit, and they were like, "Hey, I noticed you like Wild Turkey 101 a lot. And you're always talking about it and recommending it. Have you ever had Dusty Turkey?" And I said, "No, I haven't had that." And he sent me 92 Cheesy Gold Foal and a 1981 101 year. And the first one I opened, the first sample I opened was a 101 year from 1981. And the second I nosed it, I mean, I'm telling you, the second I nosed that whiskey, I was a Wild Turkey fan. Like it was just like it was like, Alice falling down the rabbit hole. Like there was no going back at that point. I had to figure out what this whiskey was because I was in love. Um, so I set out on this journey to try to find a comparable profile, which we all know that you're not going to find that dusty profile in modern whiskeys, but at that time I didn't really know that. So I went through the whole catalog, any wild turkey expression I could find, I would get. And then I would trade for samples of expressions I couldn't find or dusties. And it ended up, everybody was joking on Reddit, like, all you write about is wild turkey. Like, because I had just like 20 something reviews of wild turkey. And I was like, well, maybe I ought to just put them on like a blog and have them kind of all together as like a reference guide. And I had it private for a couple months, and then I finally flipped the switch and made it public, and it just kind of took off. Like, I guess there were a lot of people that were, had a growing interest for wild turkey, and they found the website. And I had Aaron Goldfarb, who writes for GQ and Whiskey Advocate and Punch Drink. He approached me about an article that he was doing on wild turkey, and I provided some information for him, and that kind of caught the eye of Campari, and they reached out to me and said they were a big fan of the blog, and offered to send me some things. And I told them, well, everything that you're wanting to send me, I already have and already tasted. And I mean, you're welcome to, but I'm kind of good. And it just went from there. And at one point, uh, my wife suggested I write a book because she's like, you're writing about wild turkey a lot. Maybe I'll just do a book. And, the first thought was, I'm not an author. I've never tried to write something like that before. And, but I sat down and just kind of, they say like you eat elephant one bite at a time. That's how I approached the book. I just started, and like, every night I would try to, some nights I would get a couple pages, some nights it would get nothing. Some nights I would just spend researching. Actually, a lot of nights I just spent researching, watching videos, listening to interviews on podcasts, uh, reading source material from magazines and books and uh, Google Books and all kinds of just anything I could find that had anything to do with wild turkey or Austin Nichols or the Rippies. Um, which I guess I should probably transition into it. So that's kind of how I got into whiskey and wild turkey and became such a fan. And I truly am in love with more than just the whiskey and the brand. It's the profiles just speak to me. I have a great appreciation for the Russells. Jimmy is the longest tenured master distiller in the world of any spirit. He's got more experience than anyone out there. And then his son Eddie is no spring chicken either. So combined, they have over 100 and probably 104 years now combined, or 105 years of combined experience. Um, and I always kind of pull for the underdog, and I still feel that wild turkey in the bourbon scope is still somewhat of an underdog compared to other brands like Michter's and Buffalo Trace. But that's kind of my story. But to talk a little bit about the history of wild turkey, you really have to break it down into three sort of timelines. You have the history of the distillery itself, of that property. You have the history of the brand, Wild Turkey. And then you have a history of the merging of the two and everything that came after, because they're not the same. A lot of people, they see like 1855 on a Wild Turkey bottle, and they assume that like that's the distillery, and it's not. It has, the 1855 has nothing to do with the distillery. That has to do with Austin Nichols. So I'll give you a brief kind of overview of the history, and if you have any questions, throw them in the chat, and I'll answer them when I get done. And then also, if you want to check out my book, you don't even have to buy the physical copy. There's an ebook you can download, and I gave Troy a discount code that y'all can use for that if you want to read it. But let's start with the history of the distillery. So in the mid 1800s, the Ripy family came over from Ireland, and James Ripy James Ripy, essentially senior, started a farm, and what is now Lawrenceburg. It was Anderson County at the time. And they named it, he and the people that he came from Ireland with named it Tyrone, the city that they were in, Tyrone, after Tyrone, Ireland, which is where they were from. So they started a farm and then a general store shortly after that was owned by the Rippies. And Ripy did pretty well for himself. He had two sons, T.B. Ripy, which stands for Thomas Baby Ripy, and James P. Ripy. So you had James the father and James the son. So TB and James grew up, and by the time that TB got into his early 20s, his father decided to invest in distilling because it was very popular in Anderson County at the time. You had McBrayer had the Cedar Brook, and Saffel worked for him, and then later on he would form his own thing. And then you had Bond and Lillard. So there were various brands there, many that are gone now, in that area, that Anderson County area. So James, the father, had an inclination to invest in a distillery. So in 1868, he invested in a distillery that a year later he essentially sold to his son, T.B. Ripy. And T.B. Ripy became somewhat of a whiskey tycoon. He bought up distilleries all over the place. And he would flip some of them, and then he'd buy another one. But he kind of was one of these people that he burned through money quickly, but he would scheme to get more later. So as one of his descendants said, he was alternatively rich and poor at the same time. It was like, depending on the day, he might be the wealthiest man in town, and the next day he might be the poorest man in town. So he was one of these wheeler dealer investor guys. But he was quite the distiller. He had several brands. He had Old Ripy and TB Ripy brands, and they were quite popular brands of whiskey. But they weren't. And at that distillery that we know as Wild Turkey now, a lot of people think that TB Ripy had something to do with Wild Turkey, the distillery that's there. He did not. His brother did. So his brother James decided in the late 1800s to purchase that distillery that was once Old Moor, and he turned it into I believe it's called the Old Hickory. I'll have to go back and look, but James, and he also had his own J.P. Ripy brand. But he bought the property in the late 1800s. That is where Wild Turkey is at now. Now, T.B. Ripy, the tycoon brother, ended up selling all of his distilleries to the Whiskey Trust, which I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with the Whiskey Trust. It's kind of a complicated thing, but is basically a large group that came in and bought up a bunch of distilleries and controlled how those distilleries could profit, and it's essentially an illegal thing now. But back then it wasn't. So he sold his distilleries to the trust, and for the longest time, people didn't really understand why. Like, they assume some distillers were bullied into selling to the trust, and some of them just needed cash. And with TB, it could have been either way. But what my research led to is that he was sick. He went to a sanitarium, which is essentially the Kellogg cereal brand. This is the sanitarium that was it's called Battle Creek, and it was a sanitarium that the Kellogg's ran, and that's where he went to essentially, spend the last days of his life. And so selling his distillery was more of a kind of a have to thing. So he left behind several sons, and they didn't have a distillery because he had sold it. So they wanted to get into the business. So they reached out to their uncle James, and James sold his distillery there in Tyrone, which is Wild Turkey now. He sold that distillery to the Ripy brothers, and they formed Ripy Brothers Distillery. This is in the early 1900s. And the Ripy brothers had a pretty successful operation going until Prohibition, and they had to shut down. They did not obtain a medicinal license they failed to obtain a medicinal license to make whiskey during Prohibition. So they pretty much just had to close it all down. After Prohibition, they started it back up, and it was purchased by the Gould brothers, who invested in several different distillery operations there in Anderson County. And it was known as Ripy Brothers Distillery for a short period of time, and then they changed it to Anderson County Distilling Company. And in 1954, a young chap named Jimmy Russell went to work at the Anderson County Distilling Company because his girlfriend, Jaretta Freeman, was a secretary there. And Jimmy and Jaretta would end up being married, and she would stop working there because they didn't feel like that was a good idea. But that happened in 54, and then in 1955, the distillery became JTS Brown. Still had the Goulds as owners, but they started using the JTS Brown brand name. So if we could just pause right there at 55, in the late 1800s, we're going to jump to New York. In the late 1800s, there was a group of gentlemen that decided, they were all grocers, and they decided they wanted to come together and form a grocery distribution business. And there were three gentlemen that did this, and it was there's actually several involved, but it ultimately ended up being Austin Nichols. Austin Nichols and Company was the largest grocery distributor in the United States in the late 1800s, all through the early 1900s. So if you can imagine something like a company the size of like Costco, that's something comparable for back then. But the grocery business was a little bit different. See, back then, you didn't have stores like you have now, where you get to go and you pick out the items that you want to buy, and then you go and to the counter and put them on the counter and buy them. Back then, everything was kind of behind you. So you had a clerk's counter, and there might be a few barrels of apples or something out, but all your wares were in the back room, and you would go up the counter and you'd say, I need, a hammer, and the guy would go get a hammer, bring it back to you. Or if it was something a little bit unique, like maybe you need a certain sewing machine, he would pull out a catalog and say, okay, well, we can get this one for you. Well, that catalog would be a catalog from Austin Nichols. So, all these mom and pop grocery stores all around the United States bought from a distributor, and the largest distributor was Austin Nichols. So Austin Nichols decided to get into the wine and spirits industry when five and dime started becoming popular. So when you started seeing like Woolworths and these five and dime stores opening, Woolworths had this new thing where like they actually put the merchandise out for customers to touch and feel and look at and examine, which was not something common. So they kind of started seeing that there was this whole new way of doing things, and they wanted to diversify. So they got into wine and spirits, which of course Prohibition hit, and they had to get out of that, and then they ended up getting back in it after Prohibition, and pretty much decided that they were just going to get rid of the grocery business altogether by the time they had gotten into the wine and spirits business after Prohibition, and let that go and focus strictly on wine and spirits. So Austin Nichols, they had several brands with the Austin Nichols name, whiskeys of like bourbon and rye, and then they had other spirits, gin and vodka, this type of stuff with the Austin Nichols name on it. And anyway, sometime around the late 1930s, early about 1940, let's just say 38, 39, 40, around there, an executive at Austin Nichols named Thomas McCarthy was a hunter, and he liked to go wild turkey hunting. And there was a certain area, and some people say sort of South Carolina, some say North Carolina, but I'm from South Carolina, so I'm going to say South Carolina. So Mr. McCarthy liked to take, certain business associates hunting every year, and he liked to take whiskey with him. So he took some Austin Nichols bourbon that was 8 years, 101 proof, on him to this hunting trip. And the friends just really had a blast with it. They loved it. And so the next time they decided to have a trip, they told him, hey, make sure you bring that wild turkey bourbon. And he was like, pardon? And they're like, the bourbon that you brought at the wild turkey hunt. And light bulb, he was like, that's a great name, because previously they just had Austin. It was actually Austin Nichols Kentucky Whiskey was the name of the label before wild turkey. And I think that he saw that there was an appeal there to, bourbon at that time was typically a Southern gentleman's drink. And I think that he saw that, he could kind of have a label that might appeal to Southerners. So, and a lot of labels were doing that, Rebel Yell and some others. So he started the Wild Turkey brand. So it was basically just a grocery distributor's brand, So Austin Nichols Wild Turkey 1018 year started, hit shelves around 1942, and it was mostly coming from Anderson County. Some of it was Old Boone, but most of it was from Ripy Brothers in the 40s. And of course, it could have had anything in it. It just said distilled in Kentucky, so they would get barrels from wherever they could get them. But the main sources were Old Boone, Old Joe, and Ripy Brothers. So that went on for a good bit of time there. And sometime in the late 60s, they started figuring out that, this wholesale thing, buying whiskey in bulk and bottling it, it's kind of tough, because you're always trying to have to fish around trying to find product, and they're competing with everybody else doing the same thing, and you don't want to lose your source. You don't want to lose your source. So they decided that they needed to purchase a distillery to secure production, so they would be able to control their product from the start. So they purchased the JTS Brown Distillery in 1971 from the Gould brothers, and turned it into the Austin Nichols Distillery. And at that time, Jimmy was master distiller. Jimmy had become master distiller in 1967. And that's where this last timeline starts. So you have from 71 on, really, for the most, the wild turkey that we know and love. So Austin Nichols controlled the distillery until 1980, and they sold it to Pernod Ricard, and Pernod Ricard controlled wild turkey until 2009, and it was purchased by Campari, which is who owns wild turkey now. But Jimmy and Eddie have always been there. Eddie was brought on in 81, and Jimmy's been there forever. So it's always been, while it's not owned by the Russells, the liquid is the product of the Russells' creativity and hard work, and that's where we're at now. So in terms of history, you just have to remember, with all these whiskey brands, it's not always completely as it's presented. So remember that when you look at a wild turkey bottle, if you ever see, especially on the older ones, they don't say it now, but on some of the early 2000s and back, it'll say 1855 on it, EST. That's for Austin Nichols. That's a date for them where friend P. Fritz and Robert Nichols got together and made their first grocery store, and then they added, let's see, I forget if it's James Austin. I'm losing names, but anyway, that's when the Austin Nichols grocery store started, was at 1855. So anyway, that's a basic history of of the Wild Turkey Distillery brand and combination of the two. So if anybody's got any questions, I'll be glad to answer them, or we can walk through expressions or talk about anything that might be going on. I'd be happy to help you.
So I have a question that came up right before you logged on. Was the Forgiven batches? So did
Okay.
I know 303 was like the blended version to like give that replication of like what had happened first? Is there bottles out in the wild for 302? Or like,
Well, no, behind me, I have 302 and 303. There was never a 301 though, and I've never asked Eddie this, but I'm assuming that the 3 stands for 2013, and then the O2 is the batch, and that's just my estimation of all this. But I'm guessing that 301 was the original accident. And I'm thinking that they probably tweaked it. So, like, you had the original accident, they tasted it, and they're like, okay, well, if we're going to do this, we need to make it taste a little bit more this or that. And they probably, Jimmy and Eddie probably tweaked it and then called it 302, is my assumption. But there was never a 301. There was a 302 in 2013 and a 303 in 2014. 302 is by far the better of the two Forgivens, in my opinion. But they're both cool, little, neat experimental expressions.
you said 302 was your favorite?
Yeah, by far. Yeah, 302 has a dusty quality to it. 303 is more modern and profile. You really have to taste them side by side, but it's quite distinct when you have them side by side.
You mentioned the. Oh, sorry, Troy. Go ahead.
I was going to ask. So I didn't mean to like. I'm not trying to like take control or anything. I'm just curious about this because we were talking about it ahead of time. So I didn't know there was a 301, but do you think the 301?
There wasn't a 301, but I'm making the assumption that 301 was probably the original accident.
So when was and 302 was released when?
2013.
And then it was probably such a minimal batch that they saw the demand for it and decided that the 303 would be a good idea to try to replicate.
I assume, excuse me. I was just getting into whiskey at the end of 2013. In 2014, Turkey probably wasn't even on my radar until 2015. So, who knows? It could just be Campari new into the whole bourbon thing and trying new things. And I don't know how much Forgiven was actually made. I'm guessing probably not a lot of it. You got to remember that, Turkey wasn't really popular, and those Forgiven set forever. I mean, like, just they weren't moving. So I'm doubtful that they made a ton of them. But I don't have any numbers. I've never really dug into Forgiven all that much, other than asking Eddie, was it true? Was it a marketing story? What happened? But I've never really dug into it as far as like how many barrels were involved and this type of thing.
You see the question in chat as well?
Let's see here. Okay. I don't know of any brands that are using Wild Turkey distillate. There are some that think they are, but they're not. And I mean, look, Campari can do whatever they want to do. I mean, they're a big company. It's not Eddie and Jimmy's choice as far as who gets what ultimately. I mean, they can say no, but if Campari says yes, I mean, you just have to do what you have to do. But I can tell you that Jimmy doesn't like using other people's whiskey, and he doesn't like other people using his whiskey. So if they have a say in it, they're not sourcing. But does that mean that barrels are not being, or not being sold? I can't say for sure. I do know that there are some barrels and totes out there, mainly totes, that say Wild Turkey on them or have the DSP on them, but they're not necessarily Wild Turkey distilled. They're just stocks that Wild Turkey owned from various different business dealings that they had with like Duke and before Duke went with Green River. And let's see, there was that whole well, and this is public knowledge, so I can tell you this. Like when Diageo, I'm sorry, when not Diageo, when Seagram's collapsed, um, they basically split those assets that Seagram's had with Diageo and Pernod owned Wild Turkey at the time. Well, those assets included not just barrels of whiskey, which remember the orphan barrels. So where did Diageo get those orphan barrels? That type of thing. So it wasn't just barrels of whiskey. There were contracts in place that had to be honored. So when they split those assets with Pernod and Diageo, there was whiskey that Pernod owned that wasn't Wild Turkey, but Wild Turkey was the only distillery that Pernod owned. Okay, so when you take control of that whiskey, you've got to have a DSP. So what DSP are you going to use? So there's whiskey out there from that's tote whiskey from other places. There's also some contracts that they had in place with other distilleries when Duke came along, and Duke had worked with Campari. This is Duke. This is John Wayne's family. So John Wayne's family approached Campari about doing some whiskey together because John Wayne's favorite whiskey was Wild Turkey. Well, Wild Turkey didn't have the stocks to satisfy the needs of Duke and themselves. So Wild Turkey and Campari facilitated a contract with another distillery to make whiskey under the DSP of Wild Turkey for Duke, and not all of that was used. Duke went to Green River, and so you had totes of whiskey barrels and totes of whiskey that belonged to Wild Turkey that didn't necessarily come from Wild Turkey, and so those were sold to brokers, and those went into some of these bottles that people are claiming Wild Turkey and people are paying stupid premiums for. And it's like, yeah, your docket, your paperwork might say Wild Turkey on it, but you're not drinking something that Eddie and Jimmy made. So I learned that the hard way. So, Eddie called me out publicly on that, so I learned the hard way on that one. So don't believe everything that you read when it comes to sources about Wild Turkey. Now, again, that doesn't mean that it can't happen. And there's NDAs and all that stuff can be covered up pretty easily. And Campari can do whatever the hell they want to do. They own it. So I'm not saying that there aren't legit Wild Turkey barrels out there. I just know that there are a lot of ones out there that people think are Wild Turkey that aren't.
I noticed you mentioned earlier talking about Bond and Lillard and Saffel and all of those guys.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of the little minis that they released in their names and in their honor? Right, I felt the first two weren't that good. The Saffel was much better than the first two expressions. Be curious what you think about them.
It's interesting. Well, so remember what we've just talked about, okay? And remember that the first two releases, Eddie and Jimmy weren't involved with. So,
right. Yeah.
So just remember those things there. So yeah. I agree with you. The first batches were not that great. But Eddie and Jimmy had nothing to do with those. So,
Were they considered turkey stock though? Were they barrels that were in their possession or
their own? Yeah, it was contract distilled whiskey, right? Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then the Saffel was theirs, right? The third one was Eddie or Jimmy was involved, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
The WB Saffel was a product that was under Eddie's supervision. Yeah. And Saffel's awesome. And same thing with the Bond and Lillard batch 2 was under Eddie's supervision. But all this stuff I'm telling you is like, it's already out there in the internet. It's been on Reddit, and I'm not saying sources. I'm just saying, stuff that's already, everybody knows Seagram's collapsed and their assets went to Pernod and Diageo. This is like, not, anything you couldn't dig hard enough and find. But yeah, and I'm not saying what those first batches are. I'm just saying that it's notable that Eddie and Jimmy aren't involved with them, right? Because anyway, it just so. But yeah, I like Saffel and Bond and Lillard too a lot.
when you were talking about the Forgiven, you mentioned how one batch had the dusty feel and the dusty taste versus the newer flavor. What changed, right?
I don't
What
know.
made that major difference, right? I mean, it's one of those really weird things that you do notice such a significant difference over those dusty bottles and the viscosity and everything else, but yet we know it doesn't age while it's sitting in those bottles. But something, is it why it's just sat there for 20 years, or what is it? You know, it's one of those weird things.
The only thing I can put together is that, okay, so Forgiven says it's like 4 and 6 year whiskey, if I recall correctly, on the label. It's been a while since I've looked at the tin, but on the tin, I don't think it's on the bottle, but on the tin that it comes in, I think it talks about it being, or the tube, the tin, whatever, it talks about it being like 4 and 6 year whiskey that's blended together. But as we all know, that's just the minimum age. I mean, you could put older whiskey in it, you know. So maybe the 302, you know, has that maybe that accident that happened. Maybe it was pretty good whiskey, you know. Maybe it just happened to be like, you know, 8 year whiskey or something they were going to use for 101, and she legit screwed up, and she still works there. I believe her name's Courtney.
David, real quick, for people that don't know the story behind Forgiven, do you want to?
Okay. Good idea. Yeah. So what happened was you basically just had someone that worked at the distillery. They were doing batches and, you know, well, probably 101, a rare breed or something. And she accidentally mixed rye and bourbon together. And instead of not telling anyone, which is what a lot of people probably would do, she went up to Jimmy and Eddie. Well, actually went to Eddie first and said, I need to tell you, I really messed up. I'm very sorry. I accidentally dumped this bourbon in the rye. And instead of, you know, let Jimmy know, and instead of getting upset with her, they said, well, let's taste what it, you know, see what it tastes like. And they tasted it and like, this is actually pretty good. So, you know, they talked to the management about it, Campari, and said, look, we had this accident, but, you know, we're happy with how it tastes, and we think that this could, you know, sell. So that's when they decided to go with the whole Forgiven, because she was forgiven. And it's a legit story. It's, I mean, they stand by it, and I believe them. But and then again, like I said, they did another batch after that. It just doesn't have the same profile to me. It's just it's the 303 is like if you were to make it yourself. And the 302 is like you would have to use like whiskey from the 2000s to kind of get there. It's just, I guess I'm just assuming it was older stocks or something. But who knows? It's hard to say. That's something I really ought to talk to Eddie about one day. I want to sit down and say, look, you taste these two and you tell me you don't taste the difference, you know? And I'm sure he knows, but I've never really approached him with that conversation. But it's a good question.
Do you think, out of all the brands that currently exist outside of Wild Turkey, do you think that Wild Turkey is the most truthful about their products and like what they're doing with them? You know, you get like some brands that are
secretive.
Like, I mean, they're not secretive, but you know, they like hide it in their marketing and stuff like that, try to like confuse people. But I've always felt like Wild Turkey is upfront, honest about everything that they do. Like, you know what the Master's Keep is, you know what most of the time, you know the story behind like Forgiven and stuff like that. But do you feel like Wild Turkey is still like one of the last men standing that are like honest about their product?
I think that there's a lot of integrity with the Russells. They, from my conversations with Eddie particularly, it means something to him for his name to be on the bottle. And if the name is on the bottle, it better be right. And that means the flavor, and that means the information that you're giving the customer. And he is very, concerned about, people understanding that he fully believes and stands behind the things that he puts his name on. So, and I think that if you were to talk to Eddie or Jimmy, I mean, they'll shoot straight with you. Now, Jimmy will be a little bit more vague. I mean, Jimmy will tell you everything's good. It's all the same. Everything tastes great. There's no better anything. It's all good. But that's just Jimmy. That's how Jimmy, has been his whole life. And he came, from a time that's different than now. Like all this whiskey nerd stuff. I mean, this is just like, this probably makes no sense to Jimmy. And it wouldn't have made sense to Elmer T. Lee, and it wouldn't have made sense to, to Booker. I mean, those guys are just old school, bourbon's bourbon, and just make it good, make it good. But Eddie understands the nerd side of it, and he's kind of whiskey nerd himself. So, yeah, if you ask him a question about something, he'll be honest with you, as far as he's allowed to on telling you things, but he's not going to lie to you or cover anything up. He's been quite open with me and telling me about various expressions and how they come together and what they're made of, and however he can. I do think they have a level of integrity that some other distilleries don't. But then they're invested in it. I mean, like, I'm not talking financially. Like I said, their names are on the bottles. Like you have Russell's Reserve. I mean, your reputation is on the line, with every bottle that gets labeled. So it matters to him. It matters that they have an honest product just as much as it does as a good tasting product. I think the nose are the same way. I mean, I know Booker was like, from what I've heard, they tried for a little while there to kind of shut Booker up, and they realized that like Booker's just going to say whatever he wants to say, and you just can't do anything about it. And I think Fred is a little bit more, careful about what he says when he says it. But I think Fred will tell you honestly, and I'm sure Freddie's the same way.
Something we haven't touched on. What's your take? And quite honestly, I haven't given it a fair shake, and I don't know a lot about it. But the Long Branch offshoot.
Oh, the making Long Branch its own brand.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm cool with it. I mean, it's really not something that is on my radar.
Okay.
Yeah, it's look. So Long Branch is really more about McConaughey than it is the Russells. Eddie's going to make sure that the whiskey going into the bottle tastes good. He's going to make sure that it's accurate as far as being a straight bourbon and this type of stuff. He's not going to try to pull the wool over your eyes. But I don't think that Eddie like stays up at night thinking about the next batch of Long Branch. Long Branch is a product that is not necessarily designed for the whiskey enthusiast. Long Branch is something that I would say is comparable to Gentleman Jack. You're trying to hit that audience where they want whiskey, they want bourbon, but they want it like slightly fancy, So, they go into the store and they're looking at, like I mentioned, they're looking at Gentleman Jack and which is Tennessee whiskey. It's not bourbon, but it is, and they're looking at Crown Royal or whatever. They're not really looking for what we look for. And I think Long Branch is trying to go that way. I think it's a good idea that their own brand now, because I feel like there's so much potential financially for them to do things with that market. Like, I don't know why they don't do a Long Branch RTD. Like, can you imagine going to the golf course and like having a slender can Long Branch and just cracking it right? I mean, those things would sell like hotcakes, but they don't do that. I'm like, why aren't you doing a Long Branch RTD? Why aren't you doing a ready to drink? So like a ginger and bourbon or a Coke and bourbon, like Beam has.
So, is it the same mash bill as 101?
Oh yeah, Wild Turkey only has 2 mash bills. They have a rye.
Well, I didn't know if they considered Long Branch part of that.
No, it's the same thing. It's straight. It's Kentucky straight. It's just all they do is they add mesquite to the refining process. So it just goes through an extra level of it's not really filtering, it's more like infusing. I've been told it's like they take a tea bag with like mesquite and put it in the batches. Is basically what it is. Mesquite spends time in the liquid, but it's still Kentucky straight. bourbon. So it just gives it a little bit different of a profile, and it's lower in proof. It's 8 years. It's an easy sipper. I mean, I actually kind of enjoy Long Branch in the spring and summer sometimes if I just want to like take a whiskey outside and like, you want something kind of lower proof and you like or something you mix with lemonade or whatever. It's fine for that. It's just a little bit pricey, but it's not bad whiskey at all. I mean, it's straight bourbon with just a little bit of extra oak to it, naturally. But I mean, I think that they're missing the market, in a big way. I think that they could have liqueurs, like like a Long Branch vanilla or something like that. I mean, you don't have to copy Fireball, but you could have something tasteful, like you could have like a tasteful liqueur, or you could do kind of what Basil Hayden's is doing, and you have these rum thing finishes and like, just they could do a Long Branch rye, which hey, don't be surprised if that happens because I've heard rumors about that may be happening. But I just think that they're aiming for a market that they're not hitting bullseye with. And if I were them, I would be doing RTDs all day with Long Branch on it because you're going to have like people wanting the McConaughey can, but that's just me.
I just don't feel like, the couple times I've met Jimmy just in the gift shop, but he's never asked. We never talk about whiskey. It's always been about the Reds or, the Bengals or whatever. But
yeah,
I don't see like I learned a new term RTD. I don't see Wild Turkey doing an RTD because when they do, they shuffle over to that same seltzer water, like all that other stuff.
Well,
that
hold up for a second.
Oh, you're gonna. Oh, I saw that. I do remember that on the shelf when I was in the military. So,
yeah.
but like
they do them already. They do them for Australia. It's a big seller in Australia. Matter of fact, they sell more RTDs in Australia than they do liquor. It's huge. I just think that NC Beam's in the RTD market now in the United States. They've got those slender cans, and a lot of people are getting on to those. I feel like Wild Turkey should be doing it too, but I don't think they should be doing it aimed at us. I think they should be doing it aimed at more folks recreationally into drinking, and I think the way to do that is through McConaughey. The people going on the boat or playing golf or going to play softball on the weekend, whatever. A lot of those folks, they don't really know Jimmy Russell or Eddie Russell, but they damn sure know Matthew McConaughey. So you do a few commercials of him, taking a swing with the bat and cracking open a Long Branch can. I mean, I guarantee you they start selling, but maybe I'm a fool.
Tim Smith from Moonshiners just showed it on their show last night that he's doing one.
Oh, is he? Okay. So there you go. They're popular. They're popular. It doesn't have to be a seltzer. It can be like the ones in Australia, or they're cola and ginger with bourbon. I mean, you can make them yourself here, in your house, whatever. But it is kind of convenient, and come on, they look cool. Wouldn't you like to open up your fridge and see like 101 cans in there? I mean, I'd do it. So I'd buy them.
I'm still in an ultra. I don't drink beer, so when I drink beer, it's ultra. Don't judge me.
No, I'm not very much of a beer person myself. I'll do Michelob Light, and or if I want a little thicker beer, I might get a Killian's or something like that. But I'm not like heavy into beer myself. I'd much rather just have bourbon.
So what do you think about the ryes that they've recently released?
So like Ripy rye specifically,
yeah, right?
Love it. I think it's a steal. And people say, wait a minute, it's kind of expensive. I'm like, well, yeah, but I mean, look at how much Willet rye is. The 4-year Willet rye at barrel strength is some places I see it around here. It's like $80. I don't know what it is where y'all are at. And so Rare Breeds, 59, and it's a blend of 4, 6, and 8-year barrel proof, non-chill filtered. I'd say it's pretty comparable to Willet's rye. So Yeah, I'm all for it. I think it's great. Works great in cocktails. It's a good neat sipper. Handles ice well. Great. Probably one of the best things Wild Turkey's made in years.
Yeah. Speaking of comparing, there's the Fred Minnick effect. Should we plan to see a Rare Bird 101 effect with some of the products after your BTAC article?
Nah, I mean, like I said, I've been doing that blog for 5 years now. So I don't think it's so much me as I think people are just seeking out new information. And then, okay, so what do you do if you can't find Weller? What do you do if you can't find Buffalo Trace? What do you do if you can't find Michter's 10-year or whatever? Well, you start looking at other brands. So that's just kind of how it goes. And Wild Turkey makes good whiskey, right? So all it takes is someone to get beyond that stereotype, and have a sip and then be like, wow, I really like this Russell's Reserve single barrel. And there you go. You just got another person, and they lead to another person who leads to another person. Word of mouth gets around. So plus, I mean, bourbon's just booming right now. So it's not just, Buffalo Trace, hate to use them as an example again, but that's the hot, item. It's everybody, everybody's just doing well. I mean, you wouldn't have all these startups like New Riff and Wilderness Trail, and they wouldn't be doing well if bourbon wasn't doing well. They make good whiskey, and that's key. But everybody is doing very, very well right now.
So that's
Except for Heaven Hill. They got problems at Heaven Hill.
Yeah, that's a bit problematic. So that's a good question. Good lead in. So, obviously you're the Wild Turkey guru, right? You're the big guy.
I'm a fan. Yeah, big fan.
Big fan, right? So is there anything that's taken Wild Turkey off the throne, right? Is there anything else that you'd say has bumped it down a notch? And can you be, since you are the Wild Turkey guru, do you feel like you've always got to love their products, or do you feel you can be brutally honest about them?
Oh, I'll always be honest about them. I mean, I've had some I've had to give bad reviews. It happens. It's not fun, like when I talk about Master's Keep One, when I write this review, unless something changes in the next week or so, I'm not happy about the price it's sitting at. And I feel like, especially in comparison to Russell's 13, which was phenomenal for $69 if you got it retail. And then, you're going to ask me to pay more than twice that for something like one, which is good. It's good. Don't get me wrong. It's just not $175. So, I'm going to have to touch on that. The bad thing is I've never factored price into my ratings. So I'm going to have to kind of make sure that I make it clear that, there's got to be a delineation there, but you need to take price into consideration. Okay. So I've been asked this a lot. What happens if like Wild Turkey tanks all of a sudden, or what happens if Jimmy leaves, Eddie leaves, whatever. I've been asked all kinds of variations of this question. It's no simple answer. I mean, it's not like, okay, so let's just say tomorrow Jimmy and Eddie leave and Campari's like, we're taking over from this point forward. Well, I won't be happy about it. And I'll write a lot about it. But it's not like I'm going to stop drinking the whiskey. Now, if I keep drinking the whiskey and it keeps sucking, then, well, there goes that. I'm not going to like try to tell myself and lie to myself that it's good. I'll have to move away from it. But I'd like to think that, Jimmy's never going to leave. I mean, he'll work there till the day he dies. That's a fact. Eddie, I'm sure Eddie's looking forward to retirement. He's not like Jimmy. He's mentioned it before that he doesn't know how much longer he's going to be doing that. I think right now he'll stay there because his dad is, but I think when the day comes that Jimmy leaves us, I don't think Eddie will stay that much longer, at least in a role that he's highly active in. He may kind of, this is just me. I'm not giving you any kind of like inside info. I'm just saying from the conversations I've heard him give in interviews, it sounds like Eddie, is perfectly fine with kind of moving on to retirement when the time comes. But there's Bruce and Joanne there, so you have a third generation. And Bruce is excited about Wild Turkey and the love of the brand, and he's helping create products. He doesn't want to do, I've seen several different interviews with him, and also he had a Zoom with my group where we talked to Bruce, and he doesn't necessarily want to do the same route that Jimmy and Eddie did. He doesn't want to start as a distiller, or actually they started as helpers and eventually worked to the point of distilling. But it doesn't sound like Bruce wants to be that that old school, be at the factory all day kind of job. He doesn't want to just, be at the stills and the fermenters and all that. He likes the getting out and talking to people side of things. He likes doing the single barrel program because you get to work with different people every day and meet people and taste whiskey. He likes to batch and create new things. He had a hand in several of the things that they're working on now, and also Cornerstone and Rare Breed Rye. And I got to thinking about it one day because this question came up in my group, like, hey, what if Bruce isn't master distiller? Like, what if they decide when Jimmy and Eddie leave to put, Joe Schmo as the master distiller, not a Russell? Would you be fine with that? And I'm like, sure. Look at Maker's Mark. So, there's the Samuels aren't distillers, you know. So I think that as long as Bruce played an active role, or even Joanne, his cousin, played an active role in the brand, and the kept the legacy going and had a say in the expressions, and could keep the heritage alive, and the whiskey was good, be totally fine with it. I mean, let's be realistic here. I mean, Eddie and Jimmy aren't going to live forever. I mean, there will come a day where there is no Eddie and Jimmy Russell associated with Wild Turkey one way or the other. I mean, time is inevitable. So, the whiskey has to be good, but as long as that legacy can stay alive and be curated properly, I mean, I will stay a Wild Turkey fan. Now, worst case scenario, let's say just everything goes to hell, right? There's no Russell there, and the quality of the whiskey tanks, and let's knock on wood, hope that doesn't happen, that kind of thing. But let's just say it does. Well, there's plenty of producers of excellent whiskey out there. I'm not going to just stop being a bourbon fan or stop being a whiskey fan because Wild Turkey's not around anymore. I was very impressed when I went to Starlight Monday. They're small, but Christian and Blake Huber they're in their mid-20s, and these guys, they have got it down. I mean, they have got it down, and they are quite impressive to talk to. And I'm thinking, this is the future right here. And I mean, they do it all, like from start to finish.
Now, isn't Huber sourced though?
Nope.
As of now, all that Carl T stuff is actually theirs.
All theirs, yeah. They
I
don't
was
do
thought
any
it-
sourcing. They've never sourced. Matter of fact, when Pickerel set them up, he told them, I tell everybody to source. You're the only one I'm telling don't source. You've got your own farms. You've got all the means to kind of grow this thing with your own product. So, and they were already making wine and brandy. So he told them, use your own. Now, Starlight will even admit this. Their first couple runs there, the 2-year-old bourbon they put out a few years back was not good.
Yeah.
But what they've got going out now, guys, I mean, I was there. I'm telling you, they were pulling it from the barrel, and I was amazed. I mean, there's some barrels were better than others, but some of the finishes they were doing were just fantastic. I picked 3 barrels, and I wouldn't have picked a damn one of them if I didn't think they were good.
Yeah.
That's, but then you got like Wilderness Trail. I mean, they're not craft anymore. Wilderness Trail is pumping whiskey out. And, Dr. Pat, Shane, they know what they're doing. Very knowledgeable, have a great understanding of everything that goes in making good bourbon and good rye. I see them doing very, very well. They've got contracts already with lots of other NDPs wanting their whiskey, including Old Carter, I believe, and some others. Bardstown Bourbon Company. making great stuff right out the gate. New riff, making good stuff right out the gate. There's a lot of brands out there that I have a lot of excitement for, and particularly Starlight, Wilderness Trail, New Riff, Bardstown. These are very cool things they got going on. And I mean, I like Beam, and there's Heaven Hill products that I like. I like Makers. I mean, there's plenty of good whiskey out there. I don't think I'm going to have to worry about Turkey going anywhere though. But if something really, really, really catastrophic happened, I'd be okay.
Well, as I was say, like with Turkey, because they stick to just the 2 mash bills. They've been doing it for so long now. You don't think it's just that well of an oiled machine that they can just keep on going, even if the Russells do happen to leave?
Well, yes and no. Just because you've got the same recipe and the same process going over and over and over again doesn't mean that it'll stay quality. Because I had a conversation with Jim Rutledge one time, and it was quite enlightening. I was asked him about turning Four Roses around, and what it took to make that happen, from going from a trash whiskey brand, back to getting them on the top there as far as quality goes. And he told me that when he was put in charge of that what he focused on more than anything else was the grains. It had to be the best corn. And I'm sure they have machines that can do some of that, but a lot of that you just have to you have to know what you're doing. And so you've got grains that have to be a certain, quality. You have to understand the fermentation product, like the process, because, Eddie and Bruce have told me that Jimmy does it all by smell. So like Jimmy can walk in the fermentation room, that he can tell how many days each batch has been sitting there. He can tell when one of them's turned. He can tell when one of them's ready to get dumped. He can tell that one of them needs more time. It's all just by decades and decades of just walking in and having a feel for the room. The smells, the thickness, and all this. And he's just got it down. And I computers and stuff can do a lot. But whiskey, I don't think, is a sterile process. You know what I mean? Like, there's certain things that you always want to be perfect, like perfect every time. I would love to buy like a 2x4 and it be the perfect 2x4 every time, but that's just not going to happen. But like whiskey, you can't just let it go. You have to be hands-on with it. You have to taste it and you have to smell it. And not talking about at the very end, when you're creating batches, you've got to know before you even start. Because as Jim told me, if you use just the smallest amount of bad grains and you distill it and you put it in that barrel, you're going to have crap 6 years later, and you've just wasted 6 years, of time. So each step, from the grains, the water, the yeast, the fermentation, the distillation, the redistillation, entering the barrel, the wood itself, the cooperage, everything plays just like this role that, like, if you just tinker with one of those things, you screw up all the work. The whole thing is ruined. So it's kind of like making something from scratch, very much like that, like making a cake at home. I mean, one bad egg, not enough flour, or whatever, and the whole thing's ruined. So, except this takes time, and you could waste a lot of time and money doing it wrong. So I think you've got to have, to answer the question, I went way off on a tangent, is that, yeah, machines can do a lot of this for us now, and keep consistency. And that has happened for Wild Turkey and Beam and others. Like, they have a very consistent core product line. Like the profiles do not waver like they used to. You go back to 90s Turkey and you can have like different 101s tasting different quality levels all over. You still have to have somebody watching the process along the way who has the art down, not just the science. It's not monkeys pressing buttons. It's like you got to have somebody with that talent. One thing, here's another interesting little little fact that nobody knows, because this was through a direct message. And I'll give y'all a little cool thing. I don't know if any of y'all follow Shaylin on Instagram, but she works at Wild Turkey. She's kind of like Eddie's right hand person. She does a lot of the batching and blending and pulling samples for him. And she and Eddie, and she created a lot of the Sky Vodka products that are like the flavor infused stuff. So Shaylin is a Campari lab person but Eddie loves working with her. And she asked me about, she asked me how I liked Russell's 13. I told her I loved it. I thought it was great. And I sent her my article on it. And she was like, wow, I really love that. She's like, you want to know something neat about that? I was like, yeah. She said she did all of that by her nose only. She was pregnant when Russell's 13 was batched. So when she and Eddie were working on that, she only could use her nose. So, I mean, and a lot of the great Scotch blenders, they only use their nose. They don't even use their palates. So I told her, wow, you did a great job. So, Ed, of course, Eddie was involved in that too. But I mean, just a little neat little tidbit there.
We've talked a little bit about succession. How's like the Russells or Campari? Have they like picked that next person once they're gone? Have they gone through and said, "Hey, you're going to be the next master distiller"?
I mean, I don't know, but I mean, I worked for a bank for 24 years, and we had succession planning every year. So that's kind of common practice with corporations. So I would imagine that Campari has some type of plan in place. They don't seem to be grooming Bruce to be a distiller, but I don't really think, like I said, Bruce kind of gave me the impression that he didn't really want to sit at the still all day. You know what I mean? So, you don't necessarily have to.
You can tell Jimmy and
help
Eddie
move
I'll sit at
things
the
forward.
still all day.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? He may. Things change. I mean, he's still a young fella. So, life changes as you get older. You think you're going to do one thing and you end up doing another. So, who knows? He could be. And that may be part of their planning. Who knows? They could be. Well, I know that Joanne's moved to New York. So she's kind of on that whole Campari marketing track. So it'll be interesting to see what she does. And for those of you that don't know, Joanne is Jimmy's granddaughter, but it's Bruce's cousin. So it's Joanne Street, and she's a good person to follow on Instagram because she has a lot of Wild Turkey related posts.
So with the transition from like being a Wild Turkey product to a Campari, do you think that anything has changed, or
yeah,
do you think anything has been like they've been pressured to do anything different that they don't want to do, like the ready to drink and stuff like that? Like,
well, those RTDs, I've got dusty RTDs on my. I've got like from the 90s. I mean, I wouldn't open them because they probably flat and taste awful. But those RTDs have been going on since way before Campari got involved. So Pernod started all those. But and they're in glass, by the way. The old RTDs are glass bottles. If you want me to show you one, I will. But I think Campari's done nothing but improve Wild Turkey. I think that and this is not knocking Pernod. I just think that Pernod did not see what was coming. They got out of the bourbon game, and that was their mistake. And you could tell that they were not interested in it. And Eddie's told me this before too. They just kind of like, he would come to them with ideas and say, hey, we ought to do this or that. And they just weren't interested. All they wanted to do was just make 101, the 80 proof, rare breed, send the exports out and call it a day. Every once in a while, maybe do a limited edition. And Jimmy was fine with that. Jimmy'd be fine. Eddie will tell you that Jimmy wants to make is 101 8-year. If that's all they made, Jimmy would be happy that's all he wants, But of course, he knows you can't do that. You have to have a variety, and that's why he created honey and some of these other things years ago. But I think Pernod gave up on Wild Turkey, and I think they gave up on bourbon, and they sold out. I mean, it just shows. So Pernod gave up, and Campari was kind of at a stage in that late 2000 2000, like 2008, 2009, they were at this, they were seeing that like this could be a good, like the trend was happening. Like, Mad Men had come out, Justified was out, bourbon was kind of gaining in some popularity. It wasn't anything like it is now, but it was getting noticed more, and somebody at Campari was smart enough to realize that we need to get into this. And so they purchased it. And when they did, they went all in. I mean, they built a new distillery, they built a new bottling plant. They hired McConaughey, they built a new visitor center. They expanded it, started a single barrel program, expanded it, started new expressions. You had the Russell's single barrel rye, changed the 80 proof to the 81 proof, which was a much more consistent product. It's not just a proof point difference, it's a flavor difference. Started these Master's Keeps, all like half of the things that we love right now outside of the original core products, we wouldn't have them if it was still Pernod. I guess we would, because at some point they would have to do it. But all this is because Campari invested into the brand, and I will give them credit for that. They saw something that Pernod did. Now you can see that Pernod got back into the game, but they got back into the game too late. They bought Smooth Ambler. Who else does Pernod own now? Or is that it? I don't know. I know they bought Smooth Ambler. So as far as bourbon goes,
Smooth Ambler was our most recent pick, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting little tidbit there too. So the parent company, at least last time I looked when I was researching my book, guess what the parent company of Smooth Ambler is? Austin Nichols and Company. So when Pernod sold Wild Turkey, okay, they sold Wild Turkey and all of the brand components to that, but they kept Austin Nichols and Company, the corporation. Okay, Wild Turkey was able to use the Austin Nichols name because they had an assumed name that's an LLC, that's Austin Nichols Distilling Company. Austin Nichols Distilling Company is still owned by Campari and is still registered by Campari. So Campari owns Austin Nichols Distilling Company, but the corporation that started back in the 1800s, in 1855, Austin Nichols and Company, is owned by Pernod, and they're the parent company of Smooth Ambler. So, cool little fact. I mean, I assume it's still true. They could have shuffled things around, but that's what it was. And that company was owned by Liggett Myers for a long time too, which is so Austin Nichols and Company was owned by Liggett Myers throughout the 70s. Liggett Myers was a tobacco company, and they're actually the ones that sold to Pernod. But it's just nerdy stuff. Sorry.
No, so outside of the the McConaughey Long Branch and the Master Keep stuff or the Forgiven stuff, what do you think is the best turkey product that is readily available now? What do you drink? What do you drink on a regular basis?
Okay, so my favorite daily now is not what it used to be. There was a time I would have told you 101. There's a time I would have told you Russell's Reserve Single Barrel. But now, I'd say over the last year, Russell's 10 is my favorite daily. There it is. Russell's 10 to me, I just can't drink higher proof whiskeys every night anymore. I just got stuff, life.
You drink every night? Do you have a pour every night?
More often than not, yeah. But I mean, it's my job. I mean, this is what I do, so it's kind of like comes with the territory. But sorry, I had a bug crawling on my leg. So anyway, it's I like it because it has a lower proof, but a lot of flavor. So you get the maturity of that 10-year, oak influence. But it's not like 110 proof, so it's I can have an ounce or two of that, and not a big deal at all. But I enjoy a bourbon pretty frequently.
So keeping along.
Go ahead.
I was saying, just speaking along, keeping with Troy's thought process. So out of all the turkey products, out of all the things you've sampled over all the years, what sits on the top of the throne? as the king, right?
Oh gosh.
Russell's
Well,
2000, Russell's 2003, right? 1998.
yeah.
Any of those Master Keep lines, or is it just 101 or whatever, right?
Well, there's different ways of looking at it. So sentimentally, that first Dusty I tasted, that 1018 year from 1981, nothing will ever top that. Like that was the whiskey that threw me down the rabbit hole, and that I just don't think I can ever like replace that experience. As far as the best tasting wild turkey ever, there was a master distiller selection from 2006 that was an export, and it is just phenomenal. I mean, the best turkey ever bottled, in my opinion. Period. Good luck finding it. It's 14 years old. It's not the tradition 14-year wild turkey from 2009. It's from 2006. It just says wild turkey master distiller selection. It's in the old rare breed bottle. Came in a wooden box. Just killer profile. Amazing. So that's going to be up there. 1998 would be up there. As far as the more recent stuff, I love Revival. I think Masters Keep Revival was a grand slam. 5 out of 5. One of the best things Eddie's ever made. The Masters Keep Bottled and Bond was pretty close. Pretty much same rating I gave it, but I kind of like Revival edges it out a little bit for me, just ever so slightly. I love 2003. It's no 1998, but and then 2002. I mean, it's good, but I don't know. It's nothing I'd chase. It was a little bit too tannic for my taste buds, and I think I rated it a little higher than I probably should have. If I had to go back and re-review it, I'd probably knock it down a quarter point or so. But yeah, so the modern stuff definitely, Revival is up there for me. The Master Keep Bottle and Bond. But yeah, that 2006, that's great. Now, if you want to get to like non-Lawrenceburg stuff, like I was sent a 1950s 101 rye that was distilled in Maryland, because Wild Turkey sourced rye for a long time. They didn't make their own rye until Jimmy started distilling the rye in the 70s, and so you started seeing it bottled in the 80s. But it just had just an insane profile. Like, no, it's Baltimore pure rye, and they a dead distillery now. But if you ever had Four Roses rye, like Dusty, like Four Roses rye from the 50s, same kind of stuff, same whiskey. Just killer profile. But I don't really consider that turkey. That's not like the turkey I know and love, like Jimmy's turkey. That's just the label.
Do you think Jimmy's turkey is like the best turkey that you can get outside of Dust? Well, so Dusties are kind of weird because they always have that weird, like Dusty flavor, right? Like they taste like a Dusty. Like people always say, like you like Dusty until you have it, but then you still want it, but it's not the best whiskey ever. Like, what is the best product that Jimmy has touched that you like now?
Oh, okay. So, I mean, including Dusty's?
I mean, so we're like, being in Ohio, we're a control state. So like, I'm just saying in general, like if there was a product that Dusty has had his hands in, or not Dusty, Jimmy has had his hands in outside of Dusty's over the past 20 years, like what is the one line like he has touched that you are like, people should definitely get their hands on, or at least get a pour of?
I think that those Kentucky spirits, the 90s ones you might consider Dusty, and the 2000 ones, I don't know if I'd necessarily consider them Dusty, but Kentucky Spirit, that was Jimmy's baby. And until Russell's Reserve Single Barrel came out in 2013, that was the only single barrel, at least that was the only domestic single barrel wild turkey you could get, was Kentucky Spirit. And some of those are just, I've had, like, there was a 2007 I had one time. It was just like 80s turkey. It was awesome. So if you can still find some of those 2000s Kentucky Spirits, kind of a roll of the dice. Some of them, are better than others, but they're all good. So you would probably want to look at something like that. Some of the LEs from the 2000s, like Tribute. Good luck finding it and paying for it because it's like insane now. Tribute's awesome. And there was two bottlings of Tribute. You had the American one version that was 101 proof, and then you had the export version, which was 115, but they were the same whiskey. It was just bottled. The export comes in a Kentucky Spirit bottle. And then which you have to be careful because people have tried to fake before. And then you had the domestic Tribute, which was in essentially the Russell's bottle without the embossing. A Tribute was a tribute to Jimmy's 50th anniversary. Just fantastic whiskey. There's a review on my website where I review both of them, the export and the domestic one. So probably like, reasonable to find. I'd say look for some 2000s Kentucky Spirit. If you've got money to blow, go with the Tribute.
Now, do you have a favorite rickhouse, or as far as the single barrel program goes? Because I always hear, some are better than others, but
yeah,
do you have a favorite?
Yeah. Like, so that's a great question too. But I'm always curious about like if people understand what the difference between like Camp Nelson and like what the difference is there. Like they don't understand that like when they show up to the distillery and they go for the tour, like you're visiting one spot, but you're not visiting both.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, I'll answer address all those questions. There's 3 campuses for Wild Turkey. You have the main campus, which is in Tyrone, or what we call Tyrone, which is just like a little, little niche of Lawrenceburg. So you have Tyrone, then you have McBrayer, which is across the street from Four Roses. So if you ever been to Four Roses and you look across the street and you see that old distillery there and those rick houses behind there, Wild Turkey owns those rick houses. So that's McBrayer. And then you have Camp Nelson, which is about an hour away, right next to Camp Nelson National Cemetery. And it sits on the Kentucky River. And there's 6 rick houses, rick houses there. And they used to be Canada Dry Bourbon, which was a Stitzel Weller product. And it was same, Canada Dry ginger ales. It was a Canada Dry Stitzel Weller kind of thing. But anyway, those rick houses are owned by Wild Turkey. So Campari is not really good at delineating which ones are which. So you have A through F at Camp Nelson, you have A through C at McBrayer, and then you have A through W, I think right now is the last one. They've got X, Y, and Z built. But so you got A through W in Tyrone. Well, if you're looking at A through F, that could be Tyrone or Camp Nelson. If you're looking at A through C, it could be Tyrone, Camp Nelson, or McBrayer. They're not really good with disclosing that. So you kind of have to get nerdy and be in certain groups and know, what's coming out and that kind of thing, or have a really good Campari rep that can find out the information for you. But as far as a favorite goes, that depends on the year. So, these things are seasonal, and, I could say, well, 2016 G is a favorite, or 2017 B is a favorite, or 2019 Camp Nelson F is a favorite, or like this year, I'm really digging McBrayer B, and last year I was really digging Rickhouse S, Tyrone S. So I can't really say there's a favorite. I know Jimmy's favorite is A, Eddie's favorite is G, and Bruce's favorite is B. But even they will tell you it really depends on the year. So like a barrel pulled from G last year isn't really comparable to a barrel pulled from G in 2016. So it's kind of hard to have a favorite. But see, they get to walk these buildings and they know them inside and out, and they know where the honeys are at and which floors taste which way. So for us, a consumer, to have a favorite, well, we're basing it on, 1, 2, 10, maybe 20 bottles we've tasted, and they're basing it on like barrels upon barrels upon barrels that they've tasted. So it's kind of hard for me to have a favorite. It's more like a favorite of the year. So for this year so far, I'd say the McBrayer B is my 2021 Rickhouse of the year.
So what's the worst turkey product you've had?
Oh, well, I had a 2001 Wild Turkey 80 proof that went down the drain. It was awful. The 80 proofs from the 2000s are all over the map. You can have some, like this one behind me. I've got a little, let's see, pint, if I can get my fingers right there. It's good. But I've had some other 80 proofs that are just total crap drain pours. Not good at all. And Eddie will tell you that old 80 proof Wild Turkey was 4 years in a day. I mean, they literally just dumped it as soon as it was 4 years old, and then watered it down heavily to get it out there. Which is why the 81 is actually better in my opinion. I've never really had anything like that was bad. That was bad. Let's see. I did
Or
not.
should I say, what would you say? I should let me rephrase, I guess. What missed the mark, or what had the hype for you that you were like, oh, I was so excited and it missed the mark? Like Russell's 13, while it is a great bourbon, it's $70. I had too much hype and build up in my head, like this is going to be amazing. And while it was good, it didn't live up to that hype, right? It just fell short to me for some reason.
Wasn't that the sad thing about it? Yeah, the sad thing about it was that people were like, I think what made me most upset, and it didn't make me upset. I mean, I didn't rave about it, but one thing that bothered me was like, I saw people posting pictures of Russell's 13, and they've glammed it all up and everything. They're like, finally a Wild Turkey product that can compete with X, Y, or Z. And I'm like, go, whatever, get out of here. Come on, Wild Turkey's been making good whiskey since before you were even born. Don't even give that crap, It's like they're acting like Russell's 13 is the only thing that Wild Turkey's ever made that's any good. I'm like, just move on. But what missed the mark? I did not like Master's Keep 1894. I had to, that's an Australian Master's Keep, and was so excited to get it and taste it. I'm like, what? This tastes like Wild Turkey 81. Like, it was just like not what it was not a premium product in my opinion. And I wrote a pretty tough review about it. And I actually had to see Eddie, I think like the week after I wrote it. And I was kind of like, yeah, I'd say Masters Keep 1894 was definitely a miss. The worst, okay, I finally thought of it. Spiced. Oh my God, that stuff's awful. The Wild Turkey spice. Ugh.
Could imagine.
I thought that was an April Fool's joke. I didn't know that was actually real.
No, not the pumpkin spice. They made okay. So in 2013, I think 2013, 2014, around then, Wild Turkey decided they were going to have a product to compete with Captain Morgan. So they created Wild Turkey Spiced. It's supposed to be like all the essence of a spiced rum with a bourbon. So it's essentially a liqueur. They marketed it like a bourbon. It was in a Wild Turkey bottle, had the turkey on it, said Wild Turkey Spiced. But it was essentially bourbon that was flavored. So it had flavoring added to it, whatever those flavorings might be. They didn't say. But it was supposed to be like a competitor to Wild Turkey, to Captain Morgan. They even had like this mythology around it. Like, you can still, if you go to the Twitter page, go to the Wild Turkey Spice Twitter page, and you'll still see like the map, like a treasure map, like pirates and shit. It was just like, what? And they were heavy going after Captain Morgan. And anyway, I did a review of that, and it's pretty funny because it was bad. It does make good eggnog. I will give that. It works in eggnog because it has that spice to it, that flavoring to it, and that syrupy sweetness. I know a lot of people that actually have gone into stores and bought cases of it. I'm not crapping you, man. I know people that have driven around, cleaned out stores of cases of spice to make aged eggnog because it works so well in eggnog, and it really does work well in eggnog. But I'm not a big eggnog person, so but yeah, that one was really bad. I think I rated it like a 1.5 out of 5 or something. It was pretty bad.
Aaron, I'll dispose of that 13-year for you.
Somebody didn't like
gone.
There's a 13-year that someone doesn't like.
I thought Aaron said he didn't like. He said
He wasn't impressed. I think.
Yeah, so I'll drain pour it for him. I'll dispose of that.
It's drinkable. It's certainly drinkable. It's just I had so much buildup, right? It's like I was like, God, it's 13 years. It's going to be, and it's right at this great price point because those Master's Keeps, they're 150, $200, right? I mean, the Cornerstone Rye was $220 MSRP, right? So I mean, when you see Russell's at 13 years and you're thinking, man, $70, that's the perfect bottle, right? It's a great age, not that 18 where you're going to have overcharring and all that stuff, right? And a heavy flavor. And I just had it built so much up in my head. It was one of those things. I personally overbuilt it, and
I get it.
Fired on me.
I had the same thing with it, but I felt like I've had better single barrels than 13-year, but I knew that was the only bottle I was going to be able to get of that. The 13-year, at least it's a consistent, right?
Yeah.
I think one thing that will surprise a lot of people is the 13-year is actually a blend of 13 and 19-year-old whiskey. There's several barrels of 19-year whiskey in Russell's 13. So I'd say it's about 4/5 13-year, and then about another fifth of it is 19-year. So it's got some very expensive juice in it.
Yeah, that was the thing, right? It had all those unique bottles and the aging thing. You're like, man, for $70, this has got to be amazing, and it was. It was a great bourbon, but it was just one of those things. I had such a build-up for it. Yeah. And I'm sure we've all done that, right?
Yeah.
Of course, $70 is the MSRP. We know secondary blew up. What's your opinion on the whole secondary market that's taken off in just the last couple of years?
Well, the best, if you really want to get
really, you just opened a can of worms, man.
Yeah, if you read my blog, there's 2 posts on my blog you ought to check out. Read the Russell's 13 review, and then there's another one called Father and Son and the Fear of Missing Out. And both of those address my thoughts on the secondary. Look, I'm not a hypocrite. I mean, I've traded bottles before, and I've had to find other outlets to find certain bottles before. But it's like one of those things that, there's just, I forget who said it. It was a judge one time, Stewart. I can't think of his first name, but it's called like Stewart's Law or something, where it's basically like, it when you see it. So like he was talking about pornography, like how do you know what the difference between art and porn? And he said, well, I know it when I see it. And that's the same way I look at the secondary, is like, how do you know bad behavior on the secondary? Well, I know it when I see it. If I see 2 people trading a bottle fairly, and they're both happy at the end of the day, and that's one thing. Or C+S or something, like somebody's trying to help somebody else out. They have a lot of Weller 107 in their area, and the other person doesn't have any. He's like, hey, I'll grab you a bottle, cost plus shipping. That's cool stuff. That's the secondary that I like. What I don't like is somebody going into a store, cleaning out every case they have of whatever, and then immediately going up on the secondary and throwing it up there for, highest bidder or whatever. To me, that's just not, it's taking the focus away on what the hobby should be about, which is appreciating the spirit, and making it about making money. And the consumer side should not be, looking at bottles as a way to flip and make money. Now, I know it happens all the time in video games and shoes and Pokemon and, whatever. But I'd like to think we're better than that. I like to think that the bourbon community means more than taking advantage of one another and making money off the backs of other people. That's just my opinion on it. People are free to do what they want. It's their property. I can't tell them, they can and can't do whatever, but I don't do it. I'm not on Facebook, never been on Facebook. I don't participate in those kind of things. But it makes me sad to see the state of things. But it's just, like I said, that happens in other stuff. It's not unique to bourbon. I wish it wouldn't happen as much.
But unfortunately, like, Facebook has become a huge part of the whiskey community today.
Yeah. I'm not sure how long that'll last, honestly. Facebook's got a lot of pressure federally right now to clean things up. It would not surprise me that if they created a federal oversight of Facebook, which is looking like that's a very real possibility. Facebook doesn't want it, but if that happens, I think you're going to see a lot of these groups getting shut down, and I could be wrong, and I mean maybe they'll just move somewhere else, but yeah, Facebook is a large part of it, but I've never been a part of it, and I had talked to plenty of people, so it's not something I have to have, but I'm not. I mean, I know a lot of y'all probably are on Facebook groups and would hate to lose them, and I'm not trying to say that I would want that to happen, but that's where a lot of the bad stuff is happening. Like a lot of the profiteering is happening on Facebook. So
my wife's off camera, but she said the minute you said that, she's like, true that. Like honestly, what it comes down to is like for our group, I probably burnt bridges because of the fact that like I'm not a big fan of the secondary stuff. So I always believe in bourbon karma more than anything else. But do you think that the best wild turkey product that exists right now are single barrel picks from Russell's Reserve?
Yeah, the best thing that you can find, like well, it depends on what you're looking for. So, if you're looking for like a daily sipper, in a budget, then you're looking at something like Wild Turkey 101 or Russell's 10-year, based on your profile preference. They each taste different and have a different proof. If you like a higher proof and you want like a consistently good buy, rare breed, hard to go wrong with that. But if you're wanting a unique experience, like you want every bottle that you buy to be a little different, then that's when I would agree with you and say Russell's is the way to go, because every Russell's Reserve single barrel tastes a little bit different. And that used to be frowned upon years ago because the idea was to have a consistent product. But I think that's what makes it really cool. There's other brands that have used that, like Four Roses has its 10 recipes, and which gives it a lot of different variants, quality variants. But I love that about, like, and I don't want to sound like I'm negative against Buffalo Trace because I'm mentioning them again, but because they make good whiskey. But like, for example, like Buffalo Trace picks, they always taste like Buffalo Trace, like some are a little bit better than others. Same way with Eagle Rare. I love Eagle Rare, but like, it always tastes like Eagle Rare. I've never had an Eagle Rare not taste like Eagle Rare. I've had Russell's picks where I'm like, what the hell's this? Like, where'd this profile come from? This is insane. I'm getting cedar and all kinds of weird stuff. And that's because they're coming from these natural wood-clad rick houses, and each one of them at a different elevation in a different place at a different campus. So, yeah, I would go with Russell's as being like, that's probably more of the best recommendation for a true bourbon enthusiast, somebody that really wants different profiles and adventure every time they buy a bottle.
Do you think the rick house, because I noticed that you keep saying Buffalo Trace, and they have a variety of rick house styles, right? They have brick, they have wood,
steel, and brick.
Yeah. And it sounds like Wild Turkey, they're all wood.
Right. There's a few
ventured into.
Well, no, they have a few palletized rick houses, but they're used mainly for like RTDs and like barrels that go into Wild Turkey honey, like the Sting and the liqueurs.
Yeah.
But yeah, all of the bourbons that they're aging for premium purposes are in traditional wood-clad rick houses. Yeah.
They thought about building one just to see what their product does in a different style of rick house. Cost too expensive and too great.
No, well, they'd have to lie to Jimmy or hide it from Jimmy. Matter of fact, it was funny because one time I was at the visitor center and somebody was like, "Whatever you do, don't ask Jimmy about the rick houses," because Eddie had leased rick houses over by Castle and Key back in the early 2000s, and Jimmy, he didn't tell Jimmy at first. When Jimmy found out about it, Jimmy was upset because Jimmy doesn't like rick houses. Jimmy only likes wood-clad rick houses, and somebody kind of was like, "Yeah, just don't ask Jimmy about that or whatever." I was like, "Okay." So I'm sitting there standing there talking to him, and this other guy, a friend of mine, he was a manager of a store that was sponsoring the barrel pick, goes, "Hey, on that 17-year, it was aged in stone rick houses, like, yeah, what would you think about that?" And Jimmy just looks and goes, "I don't want to talk about that." So I was like, damn, okay. Jimmy didn't want to talk about it, and he didn't talk about it. So I think that if there's any rick houses being built at Wild Turkey anytime soon, they're going to be wood-clad rick houses.
And what do you think brought about these going from I want consistency to, which I'm all for, is having different profiles like single barrel to single barrel?
Yeah, that's what I like too. Consistency is fine for a core product, but for a single barrel selection, it's got to be different. What's the point in having a single barrel selection if yours tastes like the guys next to you?
Yeah.
And some of them are closer than others, and some of them are pretty damn close, but then some of them are way out there.
What do you? I guess what do you think brought about that, going from that shift? Is it just new people into bourbon, or was there an inflection point?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, when Eddie created Russell's Reserve Single Barrel, he wanted to show off, and it wasn't that long ago. So 2013, he wanted to show off all these things that he was experiencing because he was tasting these barrels. And prior with like Kentucky Spirit, there was variants, but it was at 101 proof. So so water was added, and generally Jimmy was looking for a certain profile for Kentucky Spirit. With Russell's Single Barrel, Eddie wanted to show off that Wild Turkey had some pretty cool profiles, that varied from rick house to rick houses as different things came in season, and that's why he encouraged Campari to do the single barrel program, because at least in my conversation with him about this in 2019, I asked him about, what makes it a standard like retail Russells versus a single barrel Russells, and he says with the standard retail Russell's Reserve Single Barrel, he's kind of looking for a very core turkey profile. Won't always be the exact same. There'll be some variance there, but he kind of shoots to be within a certain ballpark. Okay. With the single barrel selections, he wants the oddballs. He wants the ones that are the craziest, most different, because that's what he loves. He likes exploring new and different profiles, and he wanted to kind of provide that experience for everyone else. Any chance we'll get Rare Breed back to 1.0? Not unless they lower the barrel entry proof. Pete had asked if there was any chance that Rare Breed could go back to the 108. They had a 107 barrel entry proof all the way up until 2004. So as that age stock kind of went away, and they had transitioned to a 110 barrel entry proof for a couple years, and then ultimately settled on 115, which is where they're at now. Yeah, I don't really see that happening with Rare Breed. If anything, it'll probably hover around the 115 mark from now until they decide to change it.
Does Eddie have any? I guess is he going to do any of the barrel picks in a barrel proof? Because I know a lot of times when you go on those pigs, most of the barrels are a barrel proof, and I know he enjoys barrel proof.
He wants it that way. It's
Right.
Campari. It's a Campari thing,
Okay.
and he has been asking them for years to give him barrel proof single barrels. Because I mean, right down the street, Four Roses is just doing it right there, you know, and he's been asking about it for a long time. And the last webinar I saw where someone asked about that, this was maybe a week or two ago. He basically said that the Russell's 13 was kind of his compromise. Like he had kept telling them that, like, I want barrel proof Russells. And they're like, well, how about we do this, you know, barrel proof, with an age statement to that. And he was like, yeah, that'll work. So it was kind of like a compromise to like, to that. But yeah, he would want it. But right now, it just doesn't seem to be something that Campari's wanting to do, which is a shame because I think it would be great.
Yeah, a lot of their stuff is I mean, it's good at the barrel proof. The 120s, a lot of the stuff that I tasted was like that.
Yeah, the only other thing I can kind of add to that is, you know, Turkey single barrels, they range anywhere from 8 to as high as 13 years. And there's not a lot of whiskey left in the barrel when you start pushing that 10-year mark. So even at 110 for a bottling proof, some of these barrels I've seen them yield as low as 42 bottles. And then the highest I've seen for a Russell single barrel is like 180s. So, if you went to barrel proof, you're talking about decreasing the volume, so, the yield is going to be lower. And then are you going to raise the price to compensate for that? And, then you're going to have stores leaving with like 36 bottles on a short barrel. And I don't know if like that's a factor too. And I imagine it is. I mean, ultimately for Campari, it does boil down to money. So I would think they're probably looking at it going, maybe it's not worth it to do barrel proof because we got more bottles out there at 110. Let's just leave it as is. And I mean, I've had single barrels that are very close to 110, just barrel proof anyway, because with a 115 barrel entry proof, it's going to stay in that 115 ballpark anyway. So I've had barrels that were like 110, 111 proof, and I've had some that are like 125 proof. So it just depends. But most of the time they're 115, 116, 114, 118, see a lot of that. So you're not adding a ton of water to get it down to 110 anyway.
You see the question that Kyle asked, will Russell's 13 be an annual limited release, or is that something that will be even more limited in the future?
Okay. I'm going to answer this one, maybe like another one. I'll probably have to jump off because I just realized it's 10, but yeah. Okay. So that's the plan. And I've had one Campari rep tell me that it's in the projections for next year to do another Russell's 13. So it's in their formal projections. But I've also heard that, that Campari's not blind. I mean, they saw what happened on the secondary. They saw that people were paying $400 a bottle. And you got to think, if you owned the company, wouldn't you be a little bit ticked off if you saw your $79 product or $69 product being flipped for $4 to $4.50? You would feel like you're leaving money on the table. You know what I mean? And you see other people making money off of something that you wanted to make money off of. So, I've got a feeling that they're having long talks about that right now. But it's in the projections. But
so if anybody's got another question, drop it in the chat. But I have one more question, which is going to be, do you think that Russell's 13 will end up being like the wake up call for like Wild Turkey, like to where they realize like they're
yes and no. I think I know. I think I know what you mean. Like, will this be where they kind of like feel like they're in the BTAC game now?
Yeah, they realize like BTAC, like the Buffalo Trace, like game, like if they market things properly, they can make a ton of money off of like what they release.
Oh, I think they're loving this. I mean, like you got to think that like they're seeing their bottles like that used to just sit on shelves. Like, I mean, they were begging people to buy decades. The reps here in South Carolina, Georgia, if you bought X many cases of 101, they would give you cases of decades, Masters Keep decades. Like they were on sale for $89 at Costco. Like it was ridiculous. And now they're seeing their products get flipped for 3 and 4 and 5 times their face value. I'm sure Campari is just like salivating over this and excited and happy. And if you look at the shareholder reports for Campari, their Wild Turkey brand has grown and overtaken some of their other spirit brands. I think they're the 3rd largest brand in their portfolio now. And Campari's been around a long time, and they have a very good foothold in Europe with liqueurs and things like that. So, you know, they've noticed all this. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. Now, here's where I think that it could backfire a little bit. If it's going to backfire anytime soon, it'll be this comparison with Russell's 13 and Masters Keep 1. We have Masters Keep 1 at $175 and Russell's 13 at $69. And to me, Russell's 13 is clearly the better of the 2 whiskeys. So I'm wondering what the feedback is going to be on that. That said, remember what we first talked about when I first got signed on about how tatering has kind of become the norm in the thing. So all the YouTube videos and Instagram posts and things are going to be like, Masters Keep, I got Masters Keep. It's the best ever. Look at my Masters Keep, you know, and they're going to sell. They're going to sell. So if Masters Keep 1 set and didn't sell, then things might change, but it's going to sell. They're going to be flipped. They're already being flipped, and people haven't even tasted it. I mean, you know, Masters Keep 1's already flipping. So I think that as long as it's selling the way it is, you know, it's only going to go up. You know,
What
I think
is retail on one?
175.
And they've already had that kind of that high price BTAC lineup, if you will, right? I mean, that's what the whole decades and master distillers.
Well,
all that
I
stuff
view it
were,
like
right?
Parker's. I view it like
Yeah.
so. We're like, it's not a BTAC thing where it's the same thing every year. I think I view that Masters Keep like it's Wild Turkey's Parker's Heritage.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So last question for the night. What are your thoughts on like the whole father son like patch? Like,
Oh, I loved it. Yeah, you can. There's a review on my website called "Father, Son, and the Fear of Missing Out." It was about, you know, let's keep in mind what the price of Father and Son is. I mean, it's like $80, you know, and you're getting a liter of 13-year Wild Turkey that basically tastes like a diluted Masters Keep Bottled and Bond because it's got whiskey in it that's older than 13 years. It's got 17-year-old barrels in it. I think it's great. And I think if you can find it, if you have someone traveling abroad and they go to a travel retail and pick it up for you, by all means, have them pick it up for you. But it ain't worth $300 and $400 and what people are flipping it for. But I love it. I thought it was good. I went into it thinking it was going to taste like the Japanese 13-year, which to me just tastes like Russell's 10, and was pleasantly surprised that it had the oak presence that it had, which, like I said, tasted more like Masters Keep Bottled and Bond than than the Wild Turkey 13-year to me. Even at 86 proof.
Yeah, I have that bottle for when my son turns 21. So I was kind of curious if it's worth keeping for another year and a half till he gets there.
Definitely. Well, I mean, I was on a Zoom last night with Reed Bechtel from 1789B. I don't know if y'all are familiar with 1789B, but it's one of the old school bourbon clubs from back when, you know, before any of us were doing it. They had the Reed and Emerald Willet bottle that was like the $6,000 Willet pick, you know, thing. But anyway, he loves it. He was sipping it. He was like, I love this 13-year. This is just a great easy sipper with a lot of flavor for the proof. And I'm like, couldn't agree more. I mean, if you don't like lower proof whiskeys, if for some reason that bothers you, then you might want to walk on by with that one because it is 86 proof, but there is a lot of flavor for 86 proof. It's got a lot of oak to it. So if you like a good sweet oak whiskey, then you're going to like it. But if you don't like a lot of oak or you don't like lower proof, probably not something for you. I guess another example would be if you liked Master's Keep Bottle and Bond a lot, or if you like the Master's Keep 17 year, the very first one, then you'll definitely like Father and Son.
Started with the Master's Keep tonight, 17 year. So
yeah, that's a good one.
So
that's a good one.
So unfortunately, 13 for us is very in high demand, and there's a ton of people that are flipping it. But outside of that, does anybody have any other questions for David or no?
I appreciate this, by the way. I always enjoy talking with other enthusiasts and different groups and kind of getting the feel. Everybody has these wonderful, informative groups where they like to talk about the good stuff. So it's nice to be invited into something like this. So thank y'all very much. I really appreciate it.
We try to view ourselves like a whiskey society, which is what we are, but we're very anti-flipping, anti-tater. But I appreciate you taking your time out tonight to talk to us. I'll shoot you an email tomorrow and tell you about all the extras that come along with like talking to us. But if nobody else has any questions, none.
I mean, we can sit and talk to the man all night, but I'm sure he wants to get going. And this has been super great and informative.
It's a school night, so if it were a Saturday or something, I'd stay up here till midnight with you. But yeah, I do need to run. But thank y'all. Hey, we'll do it again. I got another book I'm working on, and it'll probably be out sometime middle of next year, and whatever. Be happy to talk to y'all about that.
If you guys haven't, I'm gonna in 2 seconds. I'm gonna drop a coupon code that'll give you a discount on an ebook from David. Dave, I appreciate you dropping in, chatting to us. I'll shoot you an email tomorrow with a little gift package we'll send to you.
Oh man, you don't have to send me anything, y'all. I had fun.
That's how we work, and we're small. We don't pay for the attention or anything like that. So
apologies if I messed up any names or dates on the history stuff. It's always hard to kind of keep track of that stuff with so much going on. But in my book, it's accurate. I promise you, in the book, it's accurate. So if I messed up a date or a name, the right one is in the book.
Well, I'll make sure it's on. And if anybody wants to stick around, we're gonna have a little social 30 minutes. But Dave, thanks again. I appreciate your time.
Thank y'all. All right, y'all have a good evening. Thank you.
It's on. Thank you.
Cool. Well, I just got into the Master's Keep 1 a little while ago.
I was just telling people that, but you were like,
well, we're not going to talk about it because you said we can't talk about it. So everybody, Troy said we can't talk about it. No, Troy said we can't talk about it or taste it.
No, so,
that's you said can't do
when you asked that question. I was like, man, we're from Ohio. This is a control state. If one comes out, it'll be a raffle. Or if not, it'll get tatered big time. I think I told you in the email, and I was just telling these guys that the review you wrote on Russell's 13, everything you prequeled that or prologued that with, man, that's like spot on here in Ohio, man.
Well, thank you. I was talking about this on my Discord earlier today, is that, the whole like tater word is almost like a dinosaur term at this point, because tater is bourbon now. It's just, it used to be like, a behavior that you would call out because, one in a handful of people would be behaving like that. Now it's kind of like you're the minority if you don't act like that. It's just strange. Everything is just so just revolves around having the next best release or whatever, and or flipping it or bragging about it or whatever. It's ridiculous. So very little folks out there actually being critical of things when maybe they should be. So, but anyway, just observation.
Yeah, I think it's difficult though to a point because you said it's like an antiquated term now because you almost
Right.
have to, like, if there's something that does get released that's not raffled off in our state and you want to get it locally, like you have to be a tater and you have to go to the store and you have to wait or whatever to get it, and you're not going to get it just because there are a lot of taters here in the Dayton area. Dayton might be one of the worst areas in the state.
It's not good.
Yeah, I watched a YouTube video. Well, it was a local news report, and they were covering the bourbon boom.
Mhm.
And anyway, they were interviewing a few people about it, and like this one guy's like, "Yeah, I set my alarm for 3 a.m. so I can get in line," and I'm just like, "What?" Like, I'm gonna sleep.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
And then so then it shows what they waited in line for, and it's like Eagle Rare, Blanton's,
Yep.
maybe an
Blanton's all
Elmer T.
day.
Lee. And I'm like, you waited in line for that? Like, I don't know. Like, I guess, back when I was first getting into bourbon, the only thing that people really had to like put a lot of effort into finding was Pappy, BTAC, and Birthday Bourbon. That was it. Everything else you could pretty much obtain through friends, if not locally, or maybe driving a little bit. And that was like 2014, 2015. And now it's just like, just forget it. Like if it's made by Buffalo Trace and it's not like bottom shelf ancient age or maybe standard Buffalo Trace, depending on your area, even that gets kind of allocated now. Unless it's like Benchmark. Let's just say that everybody can find Benchmark.
If you find
But,
if you can find Buffalo Trace on the shelf here in the Dayton area, people will buy it and they'll take the crowd shot in the parking lot with the watch and everything because it's a big find for them. Because in Dayton, man, I mean, it's a hot commodity.
So silly. Yeah, it's just
Crazy.
crazy how it's gotten. But
You just well, we're gonna chase around here.
So we'll give.
You can find it regularly. They still chase it.
Yeah.
Do you mind? Can we? So you asked me earlier today. In the end, I had about 22 that signed up. Like up until about an hour ago.
Okay.
So we'll give it, if we can give it a few, maybe like 5 after, and then
Okay.
We'll roll and get started and do
whatever you want to do. Yeah, I'm fine. I don't really have like I don't have any PowerPoints or anything like time critical like that.
You're not fancy like Brian Hare. You froze up.
No, I don't do the Brian thing. No, if I made the big lawyer dollars, I might do something like that. But no, I like to wing it. It just, I don't know. It keeps it fresh. I think that different people function different ways. For me, if I work off of a script, I tend to get lost in the script and I lose a connection with the audience. At least that's how I feel. So, I just kind of wing it.
So if we're not going to actually officially talk about one, what do you think about it?
Well, I actually liked it. I didn't expect I'd like it. I thought, because I'm not the biggest toasted bourbon fan. Like, I don't like Michter's toasted. I thought the Elijah Craig barrel toasted was okay.
Yeah.
It wasn't bad. I do like the Maker's LEs, and all of those feature, toasted finishes. And I was pleasantly surprised. Like, what are the first things you think of with like a toasted bourbon? You think like heavy vanilla, marshmallow, s'mores, graham crackers, these types of notes. And I didn't really get, I got no marshmallow. Of course I got vanilla, but I didn't get any graham crackers or s'mores or any of the typical toasted bourbon notes that you would associate with it. Matter of fact, I got a lot of fruit notes, which was, I'm not saying it's a fruity bourbon, but I got like if you could imagine like lightly charring a caramel apple, maybe some smoked orange peel, lemon pepper. Like it had like these savory fruit notes. It's hard to explain, but like if you could take a fruit and not make it so bright and citrusy and sweet, and kind of found a way to kind of dull it down some, but still be a fruit. It was pretty surprising. And the finish is long as hell. Like it's one of the longest finishes on a wild turkey I've ever had for the proof. For 101, it has a very, very long finish. The only problem with the finish is that it has a very slight tannic quality to it. I assume that's from that secondary maturation. The bottom line is, if it weren't $175, I would be very, very, very happy with it. But for $175, I'm probably only going to buy one more, and that would be just to have for like get-togethers with like my Patreon supporters, where I could like, you know, share it. It wouldn't be for, you know, it's not one I'm going to like actively pursue. So not at that price. I mean, if it were like $75, maybe.
If you're
But
buying a
175
second one, where are you buying the second one from? Because I'm sure.
Well, this first one didn't come from my state. This came from a friend of mine that lives in Nebraska.
Oh, Bourbon Karma. Cool.
Yeah, so he just, you know, reached out to me. It was a funny story because he didn't really like it. And he was like, he sent me a text. He's like, hey, do you know anything about Masters Keep 1? And I'm like, I mean, who do you think you're talking to, man? And like, no, but I was like, yeah, I want one. And he's well, you know, the store has 2 and they'll let me have them if I want them. And I'm like, yeah, please get me one. So he goes, and I didn't hear back from him. So I text him. I'm like, hey, what's up? Did you get the bottles? And he's like, well, no, they had an open bottle. So I tasted it and I got you a sample. And I'm like, wait, I thought I was getting a bottle. He's like, oh, you don't want to pay $175 for this, man. And I was like, well, I mean, I appreciate you watching out for me, but I'm like, I kind of have to review it, even if it's the worst whiskey ever, you know? And he was like, oh, I didn't realize you'd want it. And I'm like, yeah, I'll pay, you know? And anyway, so the next week he went back and got it. Or actually, he texted me before he left and he said, hey, man, you still want that shitty whiskey? And I was like, yes. He was half kidding, but I guess it just wasn't his profile.
So
I thought it was great. It's just not, the price tag doesn't match it at all.
it's interesting because like outside of a couple different like lines that like Turkey has, like most of it is relatively affordable and it's always good. So
yeah,
but we were just talking before you came on about we're hoping that, you know, here in Ohio, like the 101 and, you know, like the standard 10-year and some other like stuff like rare breed and like spirit and stuff like that doesn't become the next, as like things in Ohio become more scarce. We're hoping that it doesn't become the next bottle that you're seeing a crotch shot of like 101 in the parking lot. You know what I mean?
well, okay, so I keep getting messages from people saying that like, oh, you know, like I've actually had a few people like send me like angry messages and like, really wish you wouldn't talk about wild turkey. And I'm like, what? Like I was doing this like back in like 2016. Like this is not like, it's not like all of a sudden started writing about wild turkey and it's selling out. Like I'm not doing that. You know, I've been doing this for a long time. And anyway, but they're like, you know, now I can't get it anywhere. And I had so many of those. Most of them weren't, you know, aimed at me, but they were kind of like frustrated. Like I can't find rare breed, I can't find Kentucky Spirit. I used to be able to find it all over the place, yada yada. I got in touch with a couple different Campari reps in a couple different states, and they just straight up told me the glass shortage is the problem. It's not that they don't have the whiskey; it's just they can't get the glass fast enough and at a sufficient quantity to get it distributed out to everybody. So it's hit or miss. Some areas have it, some areas don't. It's luck of the draw. It has nothing to do with it selling out. It has everything to do with it just not being able to be filled in time. I've got single barrels that I picked back in March that I still don't have. Everybody's behind. Everybody's way behind and running out of glass. Specifically, the rare breed glass and the Kentucky Spirit glass, I've been told, are quite difficult. And then the new
this bottle.
101. No, that one they discontinued that.
I know. Well, I mean, I miss that old.
Oh, you miss it. Okay, yeah, I thought you said
Clamshell,
this
yeah,
bottle. Yeah. So that one they're short on. But here's another big problem is that this new 101 bottle with the embossed turkey, they're not able to get that in quick enough. So they're putting 101 in plastic right now. So Like I had somebody send me a picture from the visitor center a couple days ago where Jimmy had signed their plastic Wild Turkey 101 bottle, 750s. In my local, I have one local that actually has glass turkeys, and I've got another one that they only have plastic. So it just, that's with 101.
So do
Well, we
you
did-
think,
Go ahead, Aaron. I'm still letting people in.
no worries. I was just gonna say, do you think, with the fact that we have a glass shortage, bourbon is one of those things, the longer it sits in the barrel, sometimes it gets better, sometimes it could possibly go bad. Do you think we're going to get anything unique or special because some of these barrels just have to sit and wait for that glass to show up, right? We got Russell's 13 this year. Are we going to get another surprise because of what's happened with the pandemic, do you think?
Yeah, okay, possibly. I mean, so it just depends on how they prioritize things. And they do have tanks that they can dump them in, and you can always dump into totes. So it's not like they have to sit in barrels. The one thing I think that will happen is on the single barrel program side, those do have to stay in the barrel. I mean, they're not going to waste a tote on one barrel. Okay. So you will see single barrels bottled with some additional age to it just because they've been sitting around. Now, it's not like they're sitting on the fourth floor of the rick house like you picked it from. They're sitting on the first floor of a warehouse somewhere. It could even be just like a bottling warehouse or just a generic, like a palletized rick house or something, because there's several of those at Turkey. But it's still aging in theory, and it's still getting that wood influence. It may not be as drastic as being in the wood clad rick house, but yeah. So on the short answer is yes. On the single barrel side, I think you will see some ages going up. Maybe on some of the oddball expressions, but like I think 101 will keep. Like Eddie said recently, I did a virtual behind the barrel with Wild Turkey last week, and he said that like this year's 101 is mostly 7-year whiskey, whereas opposed to like some of the past years it was like 8 to 10. And he said this has a lot more 7-year in it. And he said it had nothing to do with stocks. He just preferred the way that the make from 7 years ago tasted for 101. And if you taste the newest 101, the newer batches, now, I mean, everybody likes a different thing. Like it's just fruitier. It's a little fruitier, a little sweeter, and a little more refined. So if you like it a little more char to it, and you like a little bit more of the oakier notes, you're probably going to not think that this year's 101 is not up to par but it just it's personal preference thing. I think it tastes like 101. It's just a little more fruity, a little more sweet, a little more refined.
Does it still get the turkey funk, if we will?
Oh yeah, it still tastes like turkey. I mean, it just all the way. Here's some cool news too. I mean, if you attended Behind the Barrel, you'll already know this, but the Wild Turkey 101 12 year is coming back. So it's coming back to Japan. So they're moving the 13 year that's 91 proof to Australia. And then they're going to start doing the 101 12 year in Japan. It won't be easy for us to get, but you get the right contacts, get the right people, you should be able to get your hands on it. So anyway, look for that. I think probably, I talked to Bruce about it, and he said they were still working on the bottle design, which, you won't see it on the TTB because it's a foreign release. So it'll just happen. But I asked them if they were going to use the Beyond Duplication, tagline, because all the 12 years had Beyond Duplication on it. And he said, that was put forward as an idea, and, that was kind of what everybody wanted. But, whether Campari does that or not, I don't know. I told him I thought it'd be cool if they kind of, I don't see them doing a cheesy gold foil because that just, it's a cool bottle, but it's not a pretty bottle. But it'd be cool if they did a spin on the split label, maybe, if they just like redid the split label. I think that would be awesome. But who knows what they're going to do. Campari has great designs sometimes, and they have some designs where I'm like, why did you do that? So